Hello everyone and welcome to the Karen Becher Award Support webinar from the National Holocaust Museum. Today we'll be introducing the competition and providing some advice on different ways you can answer the question creatively. Today you'll hear from 5 different staff members at the museum, all with different skill sets and interests. Senior educators Zoe Lawton and Debbie Moss, myself Marketing Officer Livy Prideaux, our Collections Officer Jazz Margalit and Digital Collections Officer Katie Chennels. So, for a bit of background, at the National Holocaust Museum, we are the UK's only dedicated museum focused entirely on Holocaust remembrance and education. Located in Nottinghamshire, we were established in 1995 to provide a place where people can learn about the Holocaust through exhibitions, survivor testimonies, and personal stories. Our mission goes beyond remembering the past. We aim to help visitors understand the causes and consequences of prejudice, discrimination, and misinformation in today's world. By encouraging critical thinking and reflection, the museum plays a vital role in educating young people and promoting a more informed and responsible society. The Karen Becher Award is dedicated to our dear friend Karen, who sadly passed away unexpectedly in January 2024. Karen Becher was an educator at the museum who played a vital role in shaping its educational work. With a background in European history and a passion for communication, she built strong connections with Holocaust survivors and helped develop programs that encouraged young people to challenge prejudice and reflect on the lessons of the past. She was especially committed to No to Hate education, working with local communities and organisations to support understanding and personal growth. The Karen Becher Award was created in her memory to honour her creativity, her compassion, and her lasting impact on Holocaust education. This award is open to 16 to 18-year-olds and was established last year. This year, we are opening the competition to all types of creative responses. The top 3 entrants will have the chance for their work to be celebrated by the museum on our website and social media channels, and the winner will receive a £500 cash prize. The title this year is Mass Media Pulls Society Apart. What do you think? Respond to this question in your choice of creative medium for the chance to win. Submissions are due by 13th of April 2026. Please submit your response to education@holocaust.org.uk with Karen Becher Award in the subject line. This award is open to all types of creative mediums, including written word, which could be an essay, an article, or a reflective piece, podcasts or audio recordings, presentations, creative writing, which could be short stories or poetry, spoken word, drama pieces, artistic responses, which could include drawings, paintings, sculptures, or mixed media, and musical compositions. Because of the variety of responses, we have recommendations and guidelines for each type of submission. For specific guidelines and for more information, scan the QR code on this page or head to www.holocaust.org.uk/the Karen Becher Award. You are now going to hear some suggestions, advice, and tips from our staff members on different ways you can approach the question.
Hi, I'm Zoe, one of the senior educators here at the National Holocaust Museum. I've got a degree in history and a background in secondary school teaching, and I'm going to offer you some pointers on approaching this year's theme if you do decide to submit an essay or a presentation. First, it's really important to break the title down. Make sure you have a really clear understanding of the definitions of key terms such as mass media or society. This is a pretty huge theme, so you might want to set some parameters for your response in your introduction. Which examples of mass media will you focus on? And of course, this might be dependent on the case studies or examples you focus on in your essay. You might also want to point out what level of society you will focus on. Will there be global, national, or local level factors that you're going to consider? Of course, thorough research is going to be paramount to ensuring a convincing and well-considered argument. Be careful about which sources you use to conduct your research. Try not to be over-reliant on one particular source. And when using websites, ensure they're credible. It's best to avoid AI summaries. You might already have some ideas before you start researching for which examples you'll provide in your answer. But conversely, you might find that starting with some broader research may yield some interesting examples for you to pursue further. It's up to you which way around you do it. Firstly, you need to ensure the examples you select allow you to consider both sides of the argument. If you are thinking of providing historical examples in your answer, the possibilities are pretty limitless, but providing at least 2 examples on both sides of the argument would be a good idea. The slide here shows just a few historical examples that would make good case studies on the theme of mass media. In terms of pulling society apart, you can see here the Reformation. There's a picture of Martin Luther pinning the 95 Theses to the door of a church in Wittenberg. The advent of the printing press and the impact this had on society as an early form of mass media would be an interesting example to explore. Another example from history of mass media pulling society apart, of course, comes from the Holocaust, with the Nazis' use and control of pretty much every kind of media at their disposal to spread hatred about Jews. This ranged from posters to cinema, newspapers to radio broadcasts, rallies to songs and theatre shows. There are so many examples you could possibly explore. On the opposing side of the argument, we have historic examples of mass media pulling society together. Here you can see propaganda campaigns encouraging British people to band together in joining the war. This was done in both World War I and World War II. Similar propaganda campaigns similarly encouraged people to help the war effort, for example by Make, Do and Mend or Grow Your Own, some of which had resounding successes. Another example that might be interesting to explore is the Olympic Games over the years, with mass media being used to celebrate sporting achievements and the event itself bringing people from all over the world together to unite around sport and friendly competition. This has been covered in newspapers and news broadcasts, radio and TV coverage, and in the modern era on socials. However, the Olympics is an interesting one as there are some examples within the Games of attempts to use the Games as part of propaganda drives, for example by the Nazis in the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games, trying to present the Aryan race as superior to all others via the medium of these games. Not very successfully, but nevertheless the attempt was there. The other option for an essay or presentation is to explore contemporary examples from very recent times. Again, you would need to explore both sides of the argument, and in the slide you can see examples that could be explored on both sides. Again, there are a multitude of examples you could choose, but here we've shown Donald Trump and Andrew Tate as examples of individuals using mass media, particularly social media, to sow division and pit people against one another. You could consider current laws and policies around social media content and companies, how this relates to free speech and the impact this is having socially. You could explore the polarization of American society, especially on either side of the political divide. You could consider the impact of algorithms and echo chambers. There are many places you could go with this. With Andrew Tate, you could research data on misogynistic incidents in schools and in wider society. You could consider themes in the TV programme Adolescence and the impact this TV programme had as a form of mass media. Again, there are so many directions you could take this in. Finally, you can see examples of mass media pulling society together in our contemporary world. For example, during COVID, mass media was used to inform and educate the public on how to prevent the spread of the virus and on restrictions. Social media became really important as a way of bringing society together to help us all get through it. #MeToo is an example of a social media campaign bringing people from all over the world together around a particular issue. This has led to some high-profile prosecutions of individuals such as Harvey Weinstein. In some countries such as Spain, changes have been made to the law. This shows the strength of this campaign in pulling thousands of people together. Whatever examples you decide to explore, be it these or others of your own interest, make sure that you draw your piece to an overall conclusion. It's better not to sit on the fence. Try to convince us of your overall view. Don't be afraid to voice your opinion. Critical thinking is what we're really wanting to encourage here. So if you are submitting an essay or presentation, I hope you found this advice useful, and I wish you the best of luck.
Hi, my name is Debbie and I am a freelance educator at the National Holocaust Museum. I have a background in teaching and an MA in creative writing. I have made use of short stories, making use of magical realism and different poetic forms to convey themes, especially those relating to the Holocaust. I hope some of you who, like me, consider yourself a creative writer might use a form of creative writing to convey your main ideas that you want to show from the title set. Many of the ideas and themes discussed by Zoe can also apply to creative writing, and you will also need to be prepared to do some research, not just on content, but read good examples of short stories or poems, thinking about what makes them a powerful piece of writing in the author's chosen form. A good piece of creative writing will inspire critical thinking in your readers. It allows you to express your ideas, but also to leave the reader asking further questions. There are a number of different forms your writing might take, outlined on these following slides. So I want to draw your attention to some key things you should consider if using one of these forms. With fiction, you must not exceed 1,200 words. This is a short story. The examples of fiction on these slides are longer fiction, but are writers who have used the theme of mass media. George Orwell, 1984, dystopia control through media, censorship and manipulation. Remember, you are only using 1,200 words, so my advice is one central message should emerge and avoid too many big ideas. Your character, which might be a person or an object or something else, should reveal themselves through action, and the protagonist must have internal or external change. A compelling conflict should appear early and is the engine of your story. Remember, every sentence matters in a short story, and you will need to set up the rising action, the climax and the resolution, and it will be sharper than in a novel. Your setting will be significant to the theme you have tried to convey. Your language in a short story, as in poetry, should have a rhythm. With poetry, every word matters. A good poem will challenge the reader to think about the story, idea, theme contained within the poem. You will have used imagery, making use of metaphors, similes and the senses when appropriate and in effective ways. You will have thought carefully about the form your poem may take and how this may support the theme. Think carefully about the rhythm, especially when it is read out aloud. Your choice of words will have considered the effective use of alliteration, onomatopoeia, assonance, personification, as and if appropriate. A good poem will convey an idea but leave the reader thinking. Simon Armitage's poetry often explores the role of mass media and its impact on society. His poem, Transmission Report, was commissioned by the BBC to reflect on the media's influence, particularly from a perspective of outer space, highlighting how the media shapes our understanding of reality. Additionally, his poem, Killing Time, scrutinises historical events through the lens of media coverage, suggesting that the media can distort and manipulate events to suit its agenda. This is a long poem, but you might take one of the themes and use it for a shorter poem. You might, as a poet, research an area of writing relating to themes such as Zadie Smith's Generation Y, which is an essay exploring the impact of social media on identity and generation differences, and potentially the conflict between them. As a poet, You might take this as a basis for your own poem, but you would need to credit Zadie Smith following the title of your poem, after and her name and piece of work. Remember, there are other forms of creative writing which could utilise your skills and effectively address the question relating to the role of mass media and society. You might make use of memoir, literary journalism, travel writing, or a personal essay. Whichever form your creative writing takes, it must still address the theme, the idea that you have taken from the original title set, Mass Media Pulls Society Apart. What do you think? In my own work at the moment, I am working on a poem relating to the theme of anti-Semitism, and it's taking the form of a sestina. In a sestina, 6 words are repeated throughout the end lines in a specific numerical pattern. My poem will address changing forms of anti-Semitism, from religious to racial and to contemporary denial and distortion. It will explore the role of mass media from biblical, Nazi propaganda and 21st century social media. The final 3-line stanza will address responsibility, education and hope. You could have a go at this yourself, should you choose. I really hope you will consider creative writing as a response to this challenge. Enjoy and good luck.
Hello everyone, my name is Livy, and today I'll be showing you how you could respond to the competition question in the form of a podcast. I have a degree in Chinese studies and a master's in museum studies, and I currently work as the museum's marketing officer. Podcasts have been a key part of both my studies and my work. They've supported my language learning and my research, and I listen to them all the time for entertainment. I've also had the opportunity to create podcasts for Durham University's Museum of Archaeology and the Oriental Museum, where I focused on bringing objects from their collections to life through audio. Because of this, I really believe podcasts are a fantastic creative medium for expressing ideas, and they're only becoming more popular and influential. A podcast is a really strong choice for this question because it is mass media. Instead of just writing about media, you're using it to explore media, which is exactly what this question is about. So it allows you to share opinions in a personal, authentic voice, include different perspectives, create emotion through tone, pauses, and storytelling, and potentially include multiple speakers or interviews. So before you record anything, you'll need a clear idea of what you'll be talking about. So start with one key question. In this case, it's, do you think mass media pull society apart or can it bring people together? What is your opinion? You can then decide your angle. For example, social media and division, misinformation and the Holocaust, the role of media in spreading hate versus educating people, or potentially how media could amplify voices of underrepresented people. Remember that this competition encourages your personal viewpoint and critical thinking. So use this opportunity to explore your view, or alternatively, different views from people of different backgrounds. So in terms of the structure for your podcast, it should be clear and it should be around 3 to 6 minutes in total. So I'd recommend doing first an introduction, which is around 30 to 45 seconds. It should hook the listener, introduce your question, and state your viewpoint, which you'll be discussing in your podcast. The second section would be your main section, so 2 to 4 minutes. Focus on 2 to 3 key ideas. You could use examples, for example, in history or current media, Holocaust education, and social media. And you could include a short interview, whether that is real or scripted, and a contrasting viewpoint. It's really up to you what you do in this main section. In the third section, you do the conclusion. So around 30 to 60 seconds, return to the question again, give a final thoughtful answer, and leave the audience with something to think about. What a podcast isn't is just reading an essay aloud. The best podcasts sound natural rather than scripted, even if they are scripted. They focus on a clear message, avoid trying to include too many ideas, and connect with the audience through relatable points or thought-provoking questions. Ultimately, a good podcast doesn't just share information with listeners. It communicates a viewpoint in a way that's memorable and impactful and leaves your audience with something to think about for the rest of their day. So think about your tone. Are you going to be serious, reflective, questioning, or friendly? Your pacing. So, for example, pauses can add impact. How will you structure your sentences? Your sound. So, even simple background audio can help. You could use audio effects. Your voice. How will you sound in yourself? Sound like you mean it, not like you're reading a script. And who is your audience? Who do you imagine listening to this podcast, and how would you appeal to them? You might even structure it like a mini radio show, a debate, a personal reflection, or a narrated story. Think about whether you'd like to do your podcast alone or with a friend, or maybe with a special guest. You can take inspiration from your favourite podcasts when planning your own. So, for example, some of my favourites include Dan Snow's History Hit, the Louis Theroux podcast, and Stephen Fry's Victorian Secrets. If you're a fan of history, I definitely recommend listening to these. So, all of these podcasts focus on themed episodes, usually exploring one particular topic and often featuring guests or experts. However, they use very different tones and structures to engage their audiences. So, Dan Snow's podcast takes a friendly yet educational approach. Each episode features a guest historian, and the discussion feels informal and conversational. Because of this, it feels less like a lecture and more like listening to two friends who are genuinely passionate about history, sharing ideas with each other. In contrast, Stephen Fry's Victorian Secrets uses sound in a much more immersive way. Through music, sound effects, and storytelling, it brings the Victorian period to life. Episodes often begin with a specific story or moment in history before expanding on it with insights from historians. This podcast takes a more story-based approach. Alternatively, Louis Theroux's podcast takes a more introspective approach. It focuses closely on the personal experiences of his guests, creating a calm and thoughtful space for deeper reflection. Rather than debate, it's about listening and understanding different perspectives. Together, these examples show there isn't just one way to make a successful podcast. It's about choosing a style that best suits your message and your audience. This is how I would answer the question. So, one powerful example of how mass media can divide society is the rise of AI-generated Holocaust distortion. Recently, BBC News reported on how artificial intelligence has been used to create fake images and stories about the Holocaust, and they appear realistic and appeal to these empathetic people online to generate likes and comments for profit. This kind of content can blur the line between truth and fiction. Some real stories and photographs from the Holocaust have been edited with AI and shared online, and other posts are completely fabricated, telling the stories of people who never existed. Some people may accept or share this content without questioning its accuracy, while others have used it as fuel to promote Holocaust denial, which I've seen on the museum's own social media. This creates disagreement, confusion, and mistrust, particularly around something as sensitive and historically significant as the Holocaust. In this case, instead of educating people, mass media, social media in this case, contributes to misinformation and division, showing how powerful and potentially harmful these technologies can be. In a podcast format, I would introduce the topic, discuss some of the most popular images circulating, and invite two guests to speak. The first one would be an AI expert who can talk about where these images came from and what other harms AI could have in the future. And a Holocaust survivor would be my second guest, who could give some more examples from their own experience of how mass media has affected them and talk about how these images distort their own stories. So, of course, this isn't the only way you could answer this question. There are many other ways mass media can divide society. So, here's a few more examples that you could use. Social media echo chambers, so how platforms can reinforce people's existing views, making it harder to understand different perspectives. Misinformation during COVID-19, how false health advice and conspiracy theories cause conflict. Political media coverage, how different news outlets can present the same events in very different ways, leading to polarization. Or even online cancel culture, how celebrities and public figures can be quickly judged and divided opinion can escalate rapidly online. So I hope this has been useful if you are planning on doing a podcast for your submission, and I hope it's given you a few extra ideas. I look forward to hopefully hearing some of them.
Hello, I am Jazz, and I'm going to run through how you can approach your entry to this statement through an artistic response, specifically through a musical composition. So, as we've said, there's lots of different ways that you could approach this entry, be it through essay form, fine art, but a really interesting way you could use is through kind of a musical composition. We ask that if you are going to do a musical entry, that it is no longer than 3 minutes, and that you submit a recording of the piece so that we can listen to it. In addition to the recording, if you'd like, you can also submit an accompanying score. You don't have to do that. You can, if you'd wish, just submit the recording. It doesn't have to be you playing the recording. If you've got a friend that plays the particular instrument or it's multiple people, you can have whoever you'd like play it. But if you decide to go down the route where the score itself contributes to the entry, then you could submit that so that we can see kind of the artistic shape that it takes as well. We also ask that you submit a 250-word commentary on your work. Now, that doesn't have to be an essay, but what it does need to do is talk about your inspiration and your intentions of the piece, what you're seeing in the music and how it's been formed, in particular answering and thinking about the question itself and mass media and its role in society. There are many different ways in which you could create a musical piece in response to the statement, mass media pulls society apart. You may choose to compose an expressive reflection using your chosen instrument or a small ensemble. It could use vocal work, but it could also be a more contemporary work. It doesn't have to be strictly a piano concerto or a violin piece or a song. You could use different ideas that use musical technology. You could be experimental in it. And you could also decide that in addition to the music itself, the score and the way that you develop the score is part of the experience in itself. Just a few things to think about. Think about the instruments that you're including, but also why you're choosing those instruments. Is it that you've chosen the instruments because of the sound and what you associate with those sounds? Is it that you've chosen a voice to be used? Is the voice speaking? Is the voice singing? What's the voice trying to say? Look at as well, if you are using a score, how are you presenting it? It doesn't have to be just your classic staves with your notes and a direct transcription of what you're hearing. The score itself could form an artwork, and we'll have a look at that as an idea in our next slide. And think about your inspiration and how that is reflected in the music. How do you feel about the statement, mass media pulls society apart? Do you agree? How do you want to represent that? And how do you want to show that reflected in the music itself? Is that going to be reflected in the instruments you choose? Is it going to be reflected in the melody that's created, in the harmony, in the dissonances? So, as I mentioned, the response does not have to be a traditional musical response. It could involve contemporary approaches inspired by the avant-garde, using non-traditional sounds, techniques, musical technology, whatever it is you feel is your strength. Here's an example of how I'd like to approach it. So if I was answering this statement or thinking about how to translate this statement into a musical work, what I'd do is I'd decide that the musical work itself is going to take a technical translation on the statement, mass media pulls society apart. And I'd do that by creating musical cells. Each cell would be a musical transcription of the introductory music for a different news outlet. The music that we're so familiar with hearing at the news at 6, the news at 10. And so these would be transcribed into being these individual cells. And then I'd arrange the cells on a page, which as it goes through gradually involve more space and more rests as they're being played. And so you'd then have this physical manifestation of the news pulling apart and being pulled apart, and the music itself kind of having this space between it. I'd be really interested in, rather than just having it on a classic stave, that the score kind of uses maybe an A3 sheet where there's one central cell which has that music and you decide how you follow it, and it expands gradually to take up the whole sheet. And so it could be different each time you played it through. As I said, there's so many different ways that you could approach this. That's just one idea, and that's how I'd personally find it really interesting to explore. But we look really forward to hearing all of the different examples and ideas that you all come up with.
Hello everyone, my name's Katie and I'm going to talk you through how you might approach an artistic response to the Karen Becher Award. So on this first slide, I just wanted to break the misconception that an artistic response has to be a painting or a drawing. There's so many different interesting formats that could change the way or affect the way that your idea or answer to the question might be interpreted. So some of the different ones I've listed on here are collage, photography, sculpture, textiles and sewing, posters, comics, short films, graphic illustrations, or drama and performance art. Each one could have a different way of telling the theme or argument that you want to cover as in your answer to the question. So moving on to things to consider, I've put here the basic things that I think you should be covering. So the first one is the identifying the theme you want to cover and what is your argument. I think it's really important that you have clear messaging so that the viewer can understand what you're trying to say through your artistic response. So do you want to approach the question in quite a black and white way? Are you very starkly for social media, it brings society together? Or are you against? You want to show very much that you're against social media and it fractures society. And think about what sort of visual imagery you could use to support which side of the argument you're on. Or alternatively, are you more interested in the grey area? Do you want to show mass media pulling society together but also fracturing? Is there some kind of middle ground in between that you're particularly interested in? It's just important that you pinpoint exactly what you're trying to convey so that the viewer can understand through whatever you choose to make. And that brings us on to what medium you're using and how is this going to affect your response. For example, you could make a collage from newspaper clippings and different found material. How might that differ to a collage that's made digitally? Or again with a painting, you could go quite photorealistic and do a very realistic response. Or you could approach it in a more abstract manner and submit an abstract painting that might convey more of a concept and an idea rather than something very literal. And how would those two different styles of painting, how could they show different responses? And again with a short film, if you made a short film, would you convey a first person personal experience? Or you could convey something in the third person. So just think about the medium that you're using and how that changes how the viewer might interpret your messaging. And then onto your creative process. How are you going to document this for the statement that's going to go alongside your submission? And how is this going to help you create your response? For example, are you going to go in with a lot of research and kind of back up your ideas through lots of different sources? Or are you going to think through making? I think kind of starting with sketching and learning through the act of creating something is just as a valid way to get your thoughts and ideas down on paper, as is, finding different sources and researching online. So just different ways of approaching the creative process. How are you going to do that? And how is that going to form your final response? And then I always think it's important to look at case studies. What other artists have explored the themes of media? And who are you going to take, or who have you taken inspiration from? And not just seeing what else is out there by other artists, but also how are you going to add to the conversation that already exists out there? What's the new idea? What's the new thing you're going to contribute? So the example I've put here is called Star Witness. It's by an artist called Karen Garfin, who is currently on display at the National Holocaust Museum. And she's a Jewish artist, and she has created 600 yellow stars. Each one represents 10,000 Jewish people who were murdered in the Holocaust. For this work, you might be able to recognise the yellow star. She's replicated the yellow stars that a lot of Jewish people were forced to wear as a mark of persecution during the Holocaust. And she's embroidered or included printed imagery on each one that relate to both anti-Semitism in the Holocaust and anti-Semitism today. The examples I've picked out are particularly interesting, relating to social media. So she created this in 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic, when there were a lot of anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish, racist memes going around on social media. So she's used some of this imagery and put it on a historical piece of propaganda to show how the same ideas from the Holocaust have been continued through to today, to the 21st century, and are still being used on social media. So as well as different kind of meme imagery she's also used statistics and different quotes. You can see one on the screen there. Other ones she's included, for example, another one says, Twitter appears to be the favoured web-based ground for spreading anti-Semitic hatred. There were 214 incidents reported in 2019 alone. Other ones, she's kind of put direct experiences that people have experienced, such as a man threatened me in an online chat room that he would massacre all the Jews. So she's used both examples from first-hand accounts and statistics to show how social media is continuing anti-Semitism, the same ideals that were used during the Holocaust. It's also interesting as well, coming on to the last point, what is your title going to be and how is that going to convey your message? Karen Garfin made this as part of a series, an exhibition series called Fabricated, which references the rising manufacture of conspiracy theories that are made up online, as well as referencing how the exhibition is made from textiles. So she gave it a double meaning that really represents the fabricated conspiracy theories, as well as how she literally fabricated the artwork through sewing. So now I'll bring you on to an example that I thought of just off the top of my head, how I might approach my response. So I'm particularly interested in looking at social media and how social media is pulling society apart through rising misogyny. So I was thinking, what different sources can I look at to do my research, inspired by when I watched Adolescence last year. So I was thinking the different things that Andrew Tate has posted, different misogynistic language used on social media and different chat rooms like Reddit and 4chan, and how that language is becoming a part of everyday language used online. And then, like Karen Garfin, looking at the visual side of it as well, how meme culture is impacting this kind of discrimination and how it's pulling society apart. So I had those kind of basic ideas. Then I went out and did some research. So I've just put a few screenshots on the screen here. So I looked at some news articles that were talking about how influencers are driving misogyny, particularly in young men. And I looked at some different Andrew Tate quotes, for example. And I also found actually a report by the Police Crime Commissioner, who has done a report that directly correlates the rising misogyny on social media to violence against women and girls. So I thought, right, that's the avenue I want to go down. How can I respond to this? So I chose the medium of photography, and I had the idea of taking photographs of different women in my life and asking how they've experienced misogyny on social media. And also how I would integrate the different research and the quotes that I've found. So, for example, I had an idea about how I might take one of Andrew Tate's quotes where he'd said something about how the length of a woman's skirt correlates to her being sexually assaulted. So I might take that quote and I could embroider it or attach it around the hem of a skirt and then photograph somebody wearing it. Or I might do kind of a street photography, a more documentary photography style, where I ask my female friends how they feel walking down the street and kind of photograph their experiences of doing that and how that is directly affected by the misogyny they've experienced online, how it affects their safety of walking down the street. Or I might do more kind of portrait photography, where I just interview different women and I ask them about their personal experiences and how that's made them feel. So that's one way I thought of responding to the question, although I couldn't decide whether I wanted to do a painting or perhaps kind of do sort of a short film inspired by adolescence. There's so many different ways when you do a creative response of responding to the question.
So that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. We can't wait to read or watch or listen to or look at your submissions, whatever you choose to do. If you have any questions at all, please email education@holocaust.org.uk and we'll try and get back to you as soon as we can. And yes, we look forward to seeing what everyone's come up with.